Welcome back to Architects of Latino Success. In part one, we heard about Leo Pareja's journey into real estate, his memorable moments as NAHREP president, and his approach to leadership. Now in part two, we dive deeper into what keeps Leo motivated, the potential title for his book, and an unconventional habit that has had the biggest impact on his success. Let's jump right in. Yeah, I seeing it either in our WhatsApp groups or through some text groups, or you see some of these amazing text messages, and you're like, wow, like where is this coming from? Clearly, someone's dropping in some notes in ChatGPT and copy and pasting maybe. So as far as, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on leadership, but is that something that you were able to develop just through experience, or was it something you learned from your family through where did this come about? Like, how did you get to where you are now when it comes to your thoughts on leadership?
I think it's all of the above, right? I think, no one grows by themselves or learns stuff in a vacuum. It's experience. So one thing is I think you've heard me say this before. I feel genetically blessed of who the humans I was born into. I think Warren Buffett calls it the lottery womb, right? I'm born to two of the most amazing human beings. And, I've been consistent about it. Like, if you ask me who my superheroes are, it's my parents. Super intelligent, empathetic, amazing, literally told me I could do anything I wanted to, which by the way, I do believe we all live in delusion. We just choose the delusion we want to participate in. And so I do feel blessed just of the happenstance there. And then the other part about leadership is, I think most people end up in leadership, at least in the corporate realm, not as much on the entrepreneurial realm, by accident, right? Like, you were a good doer and then you got promoted to be a manager, but then no one poured into you with like the specific skill sets. And, in the real estate industry or the entrepreneurial industry, it's, Michael Gerber's E-Myth. You start by being a doer, like a tacticianer, and then you have an entrepreneurial fit and you say, I can do this better than my boss. And you go start a business. Then before you know it, you have 3, 5, 10, 20 humans reporting to you. And most people never take the time and energy into learn that specific discipline and how you get better at it. So one is to always be a forever learner. So whether it's a book, a training, a seminar, it's how do you hone your skills, right? Like, in my early 20s, I'd spent tens of thousands of dollars in negotiation classes. And I was always the only realtor in the room. And most of the other ones were like commodity traders, like literally selling oil futures. And the way I looked at it was, I want to be the very best at the skills that I put the most value on. And so for leadership, it's seek out mentors, ask, why did you say that? Why did you do that? And then the best teacher of them all is experience, right? And recognize. And I think in any form of leadership, you have to create an environment where feedback is okay, right? As I've moved through the layers of leadership, and now I lead one of the largest organizations on the planet in our industry, I actually start most meetings by saying something to the effect, depending on the conversation. But like, if I say a number, I'm like, hey, someone please feel free to hold me accountable, right? Like, please correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And then when we're having free-forming discussions, I will say, this is not a decision or an edict. Like, this is a free flow. Like, feel free to give me feedback. I'm happy to change my position, right? Because with titles come implied dynamics, right? And this is a lesson learned where, I see someone do an initiative and I'm like, who said to do that? They're like, you did. I'm like, when? And they're like, well, you said this in that meeting. I'm like, no. I was thinking out loud. I was opening up, a space to have a conversation around an idea that was not an edict. So it's also learning from mistakes, right? Like, okay, how did we get here? And then from a leadership standpoint, a philosophy I live by that applies to just everything in life. It's like, everything's my fault. Like, 100% ownership is a very interesting way to live by. And I prefer that because I think it gives you the ability to be in the driver's seat, right? I think life well lived is one that is designed by you versus one that's happening to you.
Mhm.
And so, own even the stuff you can't control, right? And then figure out how to react to it. One thing I say on stage all the time is life's 10% what happens and 90% how you choose to react to it.
I thought about that last bit when you were talking about having someone leave your organization or leave your group or your team, and yes, sometimes it's positive, right? Because they've grown and they're ready to start their own thing. But I've also had that thought, or I like to think that, okay, well, what could I have done differently, right? What's was it my fault? Or I mean, trying to think of it as my fault and seeing how I could have done things differently to make things better or to have that person stay, just so that I can, like you said, be accountable to myself.
And a crazy exercise that would make most people uncomfortable is call them and take them out to coffee and just say, hey, based on the years of friendship, like no hard feelings, would you give me feedback?
Mm,
And
I've
could
not
you?
done that.
Very uncomfortable, right? And again, you don't get to learn unless you invite that level of conversation, right? It's super important that people feel, and again, some people you may not want their feedback, but in my experience, those are some of the more, probably uncomfortable conversations, but worthwhile conversations. Again, success is not a good teacher. Success is actually make you lazy, and I think the biggest risk we have in leadership is believing our own hype. You know, I've had ups and downs, right? Like I've had really cool titles, and then they no longer existed, whether it was because of an exit or failure. And those have been the most important lessons I've ever had, right? Winning actually is a terrible teacher
Mm,
because winning sometimes comes from circumstance, like the market, and you're not that special.
right.
I actually think through that a lot, and I say it a lot. I am not special, right? Like I'm 175 pounds, 5'11", with a beard. There's 50 million or so men that fit that description if we were, to put out an APB. And again, like I believe in a sample size of one. So, everyone's opinion matters as a consumer, as a feedback loop, as a market participant. So I think if we can remember to not believe our own hype, and if we can remember to just know that we are one of many, it becomes a superpower in even a feedback loop. Like if you're having an experience or thought process, multiply that times a much bigger number. And again, this being a leadership conversation, I'm hyper aware that there are moments in an experience that people, show you a lot of love. And again, I'm not implying meaning with it. It's just an experience. The love is not as much about you, but the seat you sit in, or the level of influence you carry, or the moment in time for the power you have in your hands. And I also encourage people to take note of who treats you a certain way when you sit in a seat and not in another. And again, like in the most authentic way possible, I'm not passing judgment, but it's also a good teacher, which goes back to like my whole way of looking at the world. It's like, what's important to you? And then make sure that what you do and say actually aligns with that. So a lot of people in my journey will say family's everything, but then I see them on the road and, probably having too many drinks at night and not being representative of what they said on stage a couple hours ago. And missing the most important things in life. Like, I think since you've met me, my priorities haven't shifted one bit, right?
No.
Um,
No.
to a NAHREP moment, I missed my own installation. I was the only president installed as a president who didn't show up because my son was born. And I remember, the night before when I was doing tech check, Omar said, "I'll see you tomorrow." I said, "Unless my son's born, and I'm just not coming." And I don't know that y'all believe me, right? Like, there's just certain things that I wouldn't miss for the world. And one of the ways that I try to frame everything is, again, like this experience is cool, but when I take my last breath, the people sitting by my bedside are going to be my kids. Not any of the realtors, not any of the partnerships, not any of the relationships. And when you frame it and go out a little further, go out 100 years, 3 generations, no one will know you were here. And so, first of all, that should be a comforting feeling when you're like freaked out and stressed out. It's like, No one gets out alive, and everyone will forget. So make sure to enjoy the ride and to spend time with the people who actually care about you.
Yeah, no, and that's beautiful, Leo. Because I think for people that do know you and have been around you, like you said, that's always held true for you. Whether it's flying in early morning and flying back the same day just to make sure you get back to the family, because those commitments with NAHREP can be overwhelming at times, and so I do remember those moments for sure. So I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but um, how do you stay motivated to grow not only personally but professionally? Putting yourself in difficult or unknown situations, whether starting Remind, a tech, a business, or now obviously jumping into the CEO role with EXP. Like how do you keep yourself motivated and pushing yourself?
So, I think when you look at someone's career, it looks like it was planned, right? And I think also appreciating that life literally is this, right? It's failure, progress, up, down, one step backwards, two step forwards, sometimes three step backwards, so only one step forward. Is being able to adapt and shift, and understanding how the brain is wired. So there's actually a body of work that has researched happiness. And happiness is completely tied to progress, right? If we look at the Industrial Revolution, and we went from kind of craftsman, like a piece of wood, to a piece of furniture, and then the assembly line, there was actually a huge drop in happiness and satisfaction, because you know not progressing is a bad feeling for the human brain. So learning and moving forward creates happiness. And sometimes I think people say, love what you do and you never work a day in your life. It's a little too boiled down. I
Mhm.
think you don't actually need to love the role per se, but you can love parts of what you lean into and the passion it gives you. And so for me, um, the probably the biggest driver is, um, so what if I fail, right? Like, and going back to what the American dream is, I wasn't born here, and a lot of us listening probably weren't born here, and like the biggest failure in the U.S. is what? Bankruptcy, right? Like in other countries, there's debtor's jail, right? If you move the cheese of a publicly traded company or a very powerful company in the countries that you and I are from, I could disappear in the middle of the night. Like literally, my kids could be kidnapped and held ransom to get me to stop being aggressive in business. Like, wow, right? Like versus here, it's like, okay, I dust off, and then you come back, and by the way, that's celebrated in American entrepreneurship, right? The
That's
the
right.
the, the rising back from failure is actually a hero story in our culture. There is, like in other societies, like failure is frowned upon, and so there's less risk taking. But it's like embedded in the American ethos, and so very early on, I kind of said, "So what?" And that's been one of those driving things where um, it's always pushed me to try the next thing.
I I feel like we've touched on a lot of topics here that you could potentially write a book on, whether it's professionally or personally. But I have to ask, like, if you were to write a book, what would you think the title would be, and the central theme that would run through that book for people to learn from?
It would definitely be about emotional intelligence. I think as human beings, we're a tribal species. Like we like being around other people. There's all kinds of data that shows that if you isolate us, we actually go crazy
Yeah.
completely. And we like to be around other people. We like to build meaningful relationships. It's a driver of happiness again. And so I would probably write a book on emotional intelligence and how you show up to others. I truly believe that it starts with a deep introspection of who you are and what your God-given talents are, and then taking what is like a natural ability and leaning into it. And I think that if we were to prioritize how we show up, first of all, have a deep understanding of who you are. And that starting point, I think, dictates quite a bit, right? Like if I think a lot of unhappiness in the world comes from potentially doing something that actually is not in line with your God-given talents. And again, I'm not talking about job. I'm actually talking about what you focus on every day and like the actual role. Um, like for example, I feel I'm creative and I don't need to be an artist. Like my creativity comes out in cooking, right? Like, I love cooking for my family and it's part of my love language. Like if I care about someone, friend or family, I'll cook for them. And so there's different ways to get to live in your gifts or what gives you joy. Um, but I think emotional intelligence starts with how you're wired and having a deep connection with it. But then it's how you show up to the world and how you invite folks to see themselves.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that book when it comes out. Is that something you think? Maybe not this book, but do you see yourself ever writing a book?
Yeah. My father's written 16. Most people don't
I know
know,
that.
but my father is an incredible public speaker that I used to see on stages when I was a little boy. So I think there is some shoes we need to fill at some point, and that's always been on the to-do list. And it's interesting. For the longest time, I've been asked, like, when are you going to write a book? For a while,
Mhm.
and my immediate response has always been, I don't think I have anything to write about yet. I think books are something that are aspirational based on accomplishment. But I think I'm starting to get closer and closer to that.
Yeah, I think our audience would definitely agree with that. So let me leave you with this last question, Leo. Thanks again for your time, but love to hear your response to like what habit do you hold that you find that people find unconventional that you feel have been a big part of your success?
Um, the unconventional part, I think, is just the discipline. I think that's, even though that's the logical thing, it's the one that people don't assume people do at scale. But I would say the one I've come to prioritize above all in the last 3 to 4 years, because I always didn't do it as much, is the obsession with protecting time blocking.
Mhm.
So I've been doing like you said it perfectly. Like next Monday, I'm taking the 6 a.m. flight out to Houston. I'm speaking at 11 and I'll be home by 7 p.m. Right? That's 6 hours of flying, but I don't want to miss dinner. I just, I have a finite amount of time left with my kids. And again, I obsess over data. And why I say a finite amount of time is it sounds dramatic because they're 10 and 8, but 95% of the time you spend with your kids is before they turn 18. Like
Okay.
that's a statistical fact. And so when I look at it down, I feel like there's hourglass. So the one that I've added to that is protecting my, what fills my cup is probably the best way to say it. So um, I don't take any calls before 9:30 a.m. East Coast because I choose to make them breakfast and take them to school and go to the gym and then have a protein shake. And then, start. Once upon a time, I'd wake up at 6 and be at the office at 7. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. That was the season I was in building. But in this season, and also the times that I'm on, I need to be on at a very like 110% intensity level,
Yeah.
right? Like today we're doing this. I have an earnings call tonight with 3 or 4 post earnings call. Like my day today will go till 7 p.m., which is not normal. But there's a high level of responsibility on how I show up. And so that means that, I obsess over my sleep and how many clean calories I intake, because how I show up matters to a lot more people now. And so I'm even more protective of how I charge my batteries. Probably a prioritization that's changed, right? Like I've always been intense. I've always prioritized ruthlessly my time, but the prioritization is a lot around my health and my energy level, which before I think I would just kind of sheer strength push through, which ended up being like burnout, like where I'd get sick for 3 days with the flu. Like I haven't knock on wood, caught a cold in almost 4 years, and I have small children, right?
Right.
And that comes, I think, from prioritizing sleep and hydration, right? Like you've seen me sip on, this is matcha green tea, right? It's like, how do I make sure that I'm optimizing my energy level? Because the way I look at it is there's a lot of people that count on it.
Well, Leo, thank you so much for sharing so many golden nuggets there for people to take from this conversation. And again, thank you for taking time for me. And I look forward to having future conversations with you, of course. And I'm looking forward to that first dinner with you. I'm waiting for you to cook something for me.
You have to come to Miami.
I'll be there. You know,
I mean, like, hey, perfect example. Last time you were in Miami, we got together with our kids.
That's right.
I said, if I'm going to see you, I got to bring my kiddos with me.
That's right. Same here. All right, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Take care.